Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I never should have gone camping alone. I told myself that 100 times as I lay there, gripping the handle of my hunting knife, my breath shallow and uneven. The air inside my tent was cold, but a different kind of chill crept over me. The kind that starts deep in your bones. The kind that whispers to you, something isn't right. Blackwood Forest had a reputation, but I never put much stock in the old stories. People disappeared, sure. Hikers went missing all the time. The woods were vast, stretching for miles in every direction, and the terrain was easy to get lost in. But people liked to blame the disappearances on something else, something unnatural. They spoke of strange lights deep in the trees, unseen figures watching from the shadows, campers waking up to find their friends missing, their tents gone, as if they had never been there at all. I thought it was all nonsense, until that night. It had been an easy hike, just a few miles in from the trailhead. I found a clearing near a small stream and set up my tent close to a group of 3 others. A family, I assumed 2 adults and a child. They kept to themselves, and I didn't bother introducing myself. The first night was uneventful. The wind rustled the leaves. Owls hooted in the distance, and the crackling of my campfire was a steady comfort against the silence of the woods. But then, around 3 a.m., I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me from sleep. I stared up at the dark ceiling of my tent, listening. My fire had died down, leaving only faint embers glowing in the pit. The night was eerily still. Then I heard it, soft, deliberate footsteps, not the quick, skittering sound of an animal. No, this was something else, something heavier, something walking. I held my breath. The steps stopped just outside my tent. I could hear the faint crunch of leaves, the slow exhale of breath, like someone standing there, waiting. I tightened my grip on my knife. Silence. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. No movement. No sound. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat, hammering in my ears. And then, just as I was about to convince myself it was nothing, a zipper. The unmistakable sound of a tent zipper being pulled down. Not mine. The tent next to mine. I sat up, my body rigid, straining to hear. A few seconds passed. Then nothing. No voices. No movement. Just dead, suffocating silence. I swallowed hard, then slowly, carefully reached for my flashlight. I hesitated for only a moment before clicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, and my heart stopped. The tent beside mine was gone, not collapsed, not torn apart, just gone. I stared at the empty patch of ground where it had been, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. There were no drag marks, no signs of struggle, just dirt and scattered pine needles. I scrambled out of my tent, my breath coming in short gasps. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small, weak. No answer. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees with my flashlight. The other 2 tents were still there, but they were silent. No one came out. No one responded. Then, a sound. Not footsteps this time. A whisper, right behind me. "Help me." I spun around, nearly dropping the flashlight. The beam flickered across the trees, catching only glimpses of movement. Something tall, thin, shifting between the trunks. Not a person, not an animal. Something else. My entire body screamed at me to run. I took off, crashing through the undergrowth, my flashlight swinging wildly. Branches clawed at my arms, my legs, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the campsite, panting, heart slamming against my ribs. And that's when I saw them, the other two tents, still there, but open, wide open. The sleeping bags inside were untouched. A few scattered belongings remained, but the people, gone. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. They hadn't run. They hadn't screamed. They had just vanished. And then I heard something. A voice. A low, distorted voice that seemed to come from all around me. "Don't look." The flashlight flickered. The air grew heavy. And just beyond the reach of my light, something moved. I ran. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, sprinting toward the trail, toward safety. My lungs burned. My legs screamed in protest. But I didn't stop. I didn't stop until I saw the first signs of daylight filtering through the trees. By the time I made it back to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. I drove straight to the ranger station, breathless, half hysterical, trying to explain what had happened. They sent a search team. They found nothing. No tents, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had ever been there. But I know what I saw, and I know I wasn't alone in Blackwood Forest that night. Story 2. I was deep in the woods when I first heard the laughter. It was the last thing I expected to hear out there, miles away from civilization. It wasn't the sound of an animal, or the wind twisting through the trees, or the rustling of leaves. It was a woman, a soft, delicate giggle, like someone had just been told a secret that was both funny and horrifying. I had gone on this solo hiking trip to clear my head. My breakup had been ugly. Months of tension, unspoken resentments, and then, finally, the blow up. She had moved on fast, and I wasn't handling it well. I thought a few days in the woods would help me shake off the bitterness, reset my mind. It was peaceful during the day. The air smelled crisp, clean, untouched. Birds chirped, squirrels darted between the trees, and there was an unshakable feeling of isolation. But at night, the woods felt different. I set up my tent in a small clearing near a thick cluster of pines. The moment the sun went down, the atmosphere shifted. The wind carried a strange, hollow quality, and the trees around my tent felt taller, denser, as if they were leaning in. I told myself I was being paranoid, just the loneliness playing tricks on me. Then, around midnight, just as I was dozing off, I heard it, the laughter. At first, it was distant, somewhere beyond the trees. Gentle, almost pleasant. My first thought was that it had to be another camper. Maybe a group had set up nearby, and a woman was telling a story, laughing at some inside joke. But it got closer. The hair on my arm stood up. I sat up, every muscle in my body tense. My tent felt too small, like a flimsy barrier between me and whatever was out there. "Hello," I called. The moment the word left my mouth, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I held my breath listening, just when I was about to convince myself that I had imagined it. A twig snapped. Something was out there, something big enough to break branches underfoot. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to shine a beam into the trees. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trunks, the leaves, the motionless branches. And then I saw her. A woman stood between the trees, maybe 20 feet away. She wore a long, white dress, dirty and tattered at the edges. Her bare feet were planted firmly in the dirt. Her arms hung loosely at her sides, limp. Her back was turned to me. Her hair was long and black, tangled in wild knots. She stood completely still. Something deep inside me, some ancient, primal instinct, warned me not to call out again. I stayed frozen, my flashlight trembling in my grip. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. I felt like a rabbit caught in the open, knowing the predator had already seen it. Then her head twitched, a small, unnatural jerk. The laughter returned, but this time it was wrong. It wasn't soft anymore. It was a twisted, wheezing cackle, a sound that came from somewhere deep in her throat, as if something was rattling inside her. It started low and bubbling, then rose higher and higher, until it became a piercing, shrieking howl. My body finally caught up with my brain. I turned and ran. I tore through the forest, branches slashing in my arms and face. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning as I sprinted toward my car. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The laughter was chasing me. Not footsteps, not the sound of leaves crunching, just that horrible, unbroken laughter ringing through the trees, echoing from every direction. By the time I reached my car, my lungs were on fire. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers shaking so hard I could barely get them in the lock. I yanked the door open, slammed it shut, and locked it. For a second, I thought it was over, and then the laughter didn't fade. It was right outside my window. My body went cold. I forced myself to look. She was standing right there, less than a foot away, her face level with my window. Her lips were stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing teeth that were far too sharp, far too long. Her eyes were hollow pits of darkness, and she was still laughing. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires kicking up dirt. I didn't care about the road. I just drove. For miles, I could still hear her, the laughter lingering in my ears, even as I sped away. By the time I reached the main road, it was gone, but the nightmare wasn't over. That night, in my apartment, I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My room was silent, my curtains drawn, and then, from somewhere in the darkness, I heard it, a soft, delicate giggle, and I knew, without a doubt, that I had brought her home. Story 3. I was warned not to step off the trail. It was an old man at the ranger station, a grizzled local with yellow teeth and a voice like gravel. He saw my gear, the map folded in my pocket, and the confident way I checked my GPS. I thought he was just another backwoods weirdo, the kind that gets a kick out of scaring city folks. "You get lost out there," he said, tapping his knuckles against the counter. "You might not come back alone." I laughed it off. At the time, It sounded like some campfire story meant to keep kids from wandering off. I should have listened. I set off on the main trail around noon, a 6-mile loop through dense forest with towering pines on all sides. The air smelled fresh, earthy, like wet leaves and distant rain. It was peaceful, too peaceful. I didn't hear birds or even the buzz of insects, just the sound of my own footsteps crunching on the path. About 3 miles in, I noticed an overgrown trail to my left. It looked ancient, nearly swallowed by the forest, as if no one had walked it in years. And yet there was something about it, something inviting. I checked my GPS. Nothing. The trail didn't exist on the map. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was something else, something deeper. A pull, like the forest itself was whispering, "Come closer, see what's waiting." So I stepped off the main trail. At first, it felt like any other part of the woods. Sunlight trickled through the leaves, dappling the ground in golden patches. But the deeper I went, the darker it got. It happened fast, unnaturally fast, like the sun was setting too soon. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. Then I started to feel off. The air was thicker here, heavy in my lungs. The trees seemed wrong, too tall, too close together, their trunks blackened like they'd been burned. The silence deepened, pressing against my ears like a held breath. And then I saw it. About 50 feet ahead, between the trees, something stood there. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It was tall, too tall, and impossibly thin, with long limbs that looked like stretched shadows. Its skin was the color of bone, and its face, it didn't have one. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless head, tilted slightly, like it was listening. My blood turned to ice. I should have run right then, but my body wouldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, as it took a single step toward me. That broke the spell. I turned and bolted. Branches slapped against my face as I crashed through the undergrowth, my boots sinking into damp earth. My GPS wouldn't work. My phone was dead. The trail I'd taken was gone, swallowed by the forest. But I could hear it behind me. It never made a sound, but I could feel it. The way the air seemed to shift, like something massive was moving just beyond my vision. The feeling of being watched. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. And then I tripped. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. My hands scraped against something sharp, claw marks, deep gouges carved into the earth, not made by an animal, made by something waiting. I barely had time to register that before I felt it. A shadow passed over me. I looked up, and it was standing over me. Up close, it was worse. Its skin looked stretched too tight, its fingers too long, tipped with something black and sharp. It loomed there, staring at me with its non-face, its head twitching slightly, like a puppet with broken strings. Then it moved, not walked, moved, like a flicker in a bad dream. There 1 second, and closer the next. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. All I remember is waking up in my car. The sun was rising, golden light spilling through the trees. My hands were shaking, my clothes were covered in dirt, and my boots were wet with something dark. I checked my phone. It was working again. I don't know how I got back. I don't know how I survived. But here's the worst part. I think it followed me. The first night home, I woke up to a sound, a faint scraping against my window, like nails against glass. The next night, my bedroom door was open when I swore I had closed it. And last night, I felt breath on the back of my neck. I didn't turn over. I couldn't. I just lay there, paralyzed, as something watched me in the dark. I haven't slept since, because I know if I close my eyes for too long, it'll be there, waiting,